we are very much grateful to have Dr. Ruth Vanita with us. And now I would like to give a brief description about ma'am. So, ma'am, Ruth Vanita is an Indian activist, author, and academician who specializes in British and Indian literary history with special focus on gender and sexuality studies. Ma'am completed her bachelor's, master's, and PhD from Delhi University, and currently she is a professor of English and World Cultures at the University of Montana, where she directs the program in South and Southeast Asian Studies. Ma'am is also the co-founder of Manushi, a journal that is related with women and society. And some of the major publications of Ma'am are A Play of Light, Selected Poems, Gender, Sex and the City, Urdu Rekhti Poetry in India, Love's Right, Same-Sex Marriages in India and the West. So, ma'am, we are very much grateful to have you today. And now we would like to hear from you about today's topic. So, over to you, ma'am.
Okay, thanks for inviting me. So I'm going to share the screen. So these are the two of the petitioners who have filed the suit for the right to marry. There are suits under Hindu Marriage Act, Special Marriage Act, and Foreign Marriage Act. There are different law cases, suits asking for the right to marry. I'll come back to this, but that is the context in which I'm speaking. Now, this book of mine, Love's Right, Same-Sex Marriages in Modern India, was first published in 2005, much before, while the Section 377, which basically made homosexuality illegal, was still on the books. It hadn't been overturned. And so why did I write a book about marriage at that time? At that time, there was no demand for marriage equality. Yeah, and the reason I wrote it is because the first marriage that I ever heard of, the first same-sex marriage that I heard of, was not any modern celebrity marriages. Now you hear of so many famous people getting married even in India. It wasn't. It was of these two police women, Leela Namdeo and Urmila Srivastava. So one is, it's also an intercaste marriage. These two got married in a temple in Madhya Pradesh in 1987. And then immediately after that, the police force suspended them from their jobs. Yeah. So to console them, Urmila's family held a wedding reception for them. This became national headlines. It was in all the newspapers. And many journalists went to the village where they were living and interviewed them and their neighbors and their families. And Urmila's neighbor, who was Sushila Bhawasal was her name, she was a village school teacher. So not very highly educated, but she made this very interesting statement when she said, what is marriage? It's a wedding of two souls. In Hinduism, at least, the wedding of two souls. It's not just a contract. It's a sacrament. So where in the scriptures is it said it has to be only between a man and woman? So I'll come back to this statement. So after this, actually before this, because the first pictures of Indian gay people that I saw in the press were not again any movement activists. They were these two young women, Lalita and Malika in Kerala, who jumped into tried to drown themselves together. They tied their hands with a wrist with a ribbon and jumped in the channel. And they left behind love notes and suicide notes saying that we can't live without each other. And since we are not being allowed to live with each other, we would rather be united in the next life. Yeah. After this, I started collecting these newspaper clippings from 1980 till the present. There are hundreds of them. And of course, I don't have all of them. Only what I could collect is just the tip of the iceberg because I don't know all the Indian languages and there would be many other reports. So what I found is this very interesting phenomenon where a number of couples, same-sex couples, mostly female, but there are some male also, from 1980 to the present, they have been doing at least two things. One thing is getting married by religious rites. So this picture you see on the right side in the new edition of the book is based on the photograph, which I'll show you later, of two young women in Varanasi just a year ago, 2 years ago, who got married in a temple just by themselves. They went into the temple, they put sindoor in each other's hair and they got married, these young girls, yeah? So I collected these and I couldn't understand. I was trying to understand this phenomenon. Why are these young women doing this? One is that they would get married, sometimes with a priest, sometimes without a priest. They would get married by religious rites. Secondly, if they could not get married, they would simply commit joint suicide and they would leave a note saying, we want to bury us together or burn us together. We want to be united in the next life. We want to be married in the next life. Yeah, it is a consistent pattern. So I was interested in where did they get this idea of marriage? Now, today, many people, when they look at the petitions, they would say this is a Western idea. This idea of same-sex marriage comes from the West. It's not true. The idea of same-sex marriage does not come to India from the West. Clearly, in 1980, when those first two young women tried to commit suicide, and even in 1987, when these two young women got married, there was no movement. There was barely any gay movement in India. Even in 1987, there was no LGBT movement at all, basically. And there was no real movement for marriage equality anywhere in the world. It was not legal anywhere in the world. So they didn't get this idea from the West. Secondly, we know that they didn't get the idea from the West is because all of these women and a few men, all of them, and this is the most important point, they were non-English speaking. They are from villages, small towns, and a few from the cities, but non-English speaking, low income group. Yeah, and so they had no contact with any gay movement. They had never heard any word like gay or lesbian or any such word. They simply knew they loved each other and they wanted to be together. That's it. And marriage and death are the two types of language that they use to talk about this union, that they want a union which will be all their life and even into death. That was what they were expressing, their own feelings. It did not come from any books or any movement or any activist or anything. Yeah, so that's the most interesting thing. And who were these couples? Now, they were from all groups, mostly Hindus. That's because Hindus are the majority, but a number of Christians, a few Muslims, Dalits, and several tribals, which is very interesting, several tribals also. And they were, as I said, low-income group, not very highly educated. They were from all backgrounds. There are fisherwomen, there are factory workers, there are students, and from all groups. I have a list, in the new edition, I have a list of the names and the backgrounds and the places. And these were from all over India, and a few from Nepal also. So this was very interesting to me. Here's an example. These two young nurses who got married in Patna in 2001. Interestingly, in some cases, the families accepted it. After some initial disapproval, at least one of the families accepted it. In this case, they were married in this temple, the Mahamaya temple. They had 200 guests. And Jaya's sister married a man at the same time. So it was a double marriage, yeah? Two siblings getting married, one to a man, one to a woman, and her entire family was present. But you can say, okay, so they got married, so there's no problem. No, there were problems, because after that, when they tried to register the marriage with the Registrar of Marriages, she said, no, you can do whatever you like, any ceremony, the government does not recognize this. So it means you have no rights. And very soon, their landlord of their flat, their apartment, asked them to leave. Right? So you can lose your job if you just get married, but you have no legal rights. You have no protection. You can lose your job. You can lose your housing. You are basically socially ostracized. There are several of tribals. I'm just giving you one example. These two young tribal women in Odisha, one had been married and escaped a lot of abuse. They had to run away. They were persecuted by the village, but finally the village accepted it and said, okay, we decided to forgive them and allowed them to be married. They work as day laborers. So as you can see, this is as far from the West as you can get. You can tell from their pictures. They are day laborers. They are very poor. They have no contact with any movement or anything Western. Even though it's 2012, they don't know anything about it. Another couple of tribals in Assam, actually. I don't have pictures of the women, unfortunately, but there was a wonderful report. There was more than one report on this, where they got married in 1999. And in their village, they were actually beaten up in public. They had to run away. They went from one village to another. And finally, they found a village which accepted them. The whole story is in my book. One is a domestic worker. She is a domestic help. And the other one is a daily laborer. Yeah. In 2006, their neighbors in the village asked the candidates who were coming around for elections, they asked them to get legal status for these women's marriage. We respect them a lot and they should have legal rights. Okay, so the candidates were totally taken aback, and because they were looking for votes, they said, yes, we will think about it, we will try to do something. And Tingring, in fact, who was interviewed, Tingring Basumatari, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, she said, we know that candidates make promises and they may not fulfill it, but we poor people, what do we have except hope? We have only hope, right? So if the law changes and equality is granted, and then it will benefit not just the rich and the upper caste, which is often said, oh, this is a rich upper caste westernized idea. It's not true. There are all these young people who want to get married, and it will help them. It will benefit them. Here's the example from the cover of my book, 2019. These, you can see how young they are. They are trying to avoid forcible marriage by their parents to men. And they went to this temple and they got married private, just among themselves, just putting sindoor. And they said, we want to live. I'm sure they're being such young girls, the families would force them to separate. And this is the other sad thing, that because these marriages have no legal status, when you follow up the story, in most cases, I would think in many cases, the families force them to separate and forcibly marry them to men. And these young girls, they are unemployed. They don't have much. They don't have much money. They don't have contacts outside their family. It's difficult to survive when their marriage has no legal status. The parents say that what is this nonsense? You're getting married, but it makes no sense. You are just friends, and that's it. And then in despair, this is what happens. And so I started in 1980 with those two girls who committed suicide. And here in 2018, these two women who were already married to men, but they were having a relationship. So they wrote on this plate, and this is in Gujarat. The first one was in Kerala. So just to give an idea of the spread of this. And they said, the world doesn't allow us to stay together. So perhaps in the next world birth, we will meet again. They also jumped into the river, into Sabarmati, tying their hands together. They jumped in and they actually died. So there are many such cases I could give you. I'm not sure how much time we have. And like in many cases, like this case, it was Delhi-based. They came to Delhi and stayed there for a while and so on. And I know a lot about it. And they were helped by activists in this case. But despite that help from LGBT activists, they were harassed, they were isolated. It was very difficult. And finally, one of them gave in and married a man. And there have been several such cases where one of them caved in and the other one then attempted suicide. So just as far as the modern history is concerned, and I should say there have been a few male couples as well. In West Bengal, there was a case of two men living in a village. One was a hairdresser and the other was a farmer. And the whole village put pressure on them to separate. One of them was married, one was not, I think. And the whole village put pressure on them to separate. It was a CPM, at that time, a CPM council in the village who everybody pressured them to separate. And finally, they both took poison together and they were found dead in an embrace. So there have been a few male couples as well, but mostly they are women. So looking back at the pre-20th century history, is there any such idea of marriage in pre-20th century history is what I was interested in. And I have written this novel, which just came out last year from Penguin. It's about the love between two women, and it's in 18th century North India. And it is based on the poetry and prose from the time, which Urdu poetry and prose, which I read in great detail for an earlier book of mine. And there I found that in the Urdu poetry and prose of the time, which is mostly written by Muslim men, they show love between women, love between men, love between women and men. They show it all in the same way. They don't show any difference. All love is love, and they show the romance of it, the erotics of it, and also separation and distress, which also happens to men and women, right? And I should mention that in the case of the joint suicides and the runaway marriages in modern India, that of course happens to men and women too. Many male-female couples also are pressured to separate, as you know, by their families. And in some cases, they run away and get married secretly. In other cases, they give in to the families. And in other cases, they also commit joint suicide. That also happens. There are numerous, in the same period, there are numerous male-female couples who also committed joint suicide. So it's not different. In that respect, it's not different. I think that's important to say. The difference is that if a male-female couple does get married, they have legal rights. Their family may still harass them, but they do have legal rights. The courts will protect them. They can't lose their jobs for that reason, and things like that. They can, if they do lose their jobs, they can sue at least. But if you're a same-sex couple, you don't have any legal protection. That is the difference. But okay, to come back to the 18th, 19th century. So in the prose writings by these poets, I found the description of a ritual of marriage in which, let me see, yeah, this is the ritual of marriage. This is a poet, Saadat Yar Khan Rangeen, and this is my translation. He describes how two women take an elaichi, a cardamom, and break it open. And then he says, then they get married among their female companions. He uses the word shadi. And he says, these women are then called elaichi, each other's cardamom. This is not the only ritual. There are many such rituals that he describes that women perform. Okay. Also, if I read a lot and I translated a lot of this poetry, both in the novel, I translated some of the poetry in the novel. Some of these poets are characters. These actual historical poets are characters in my novel. But also, I wrote another book on this poetry. In which I translated. So here you see the sort of love between women, where one woman is describing another woman and saying how beautiful she is. It's very beautiful in the original Urdu, and so translation cannot capture that, but you notice how she's praising her beauty. There are many, many poems of this kind, praising the beauty of another person. A man is praising a woman is praising a woman, a man is praising a man. All the kinds of poems exist. Another one, which is about sort of how the person affects, how one woman affects another woman and how she feels. Again, there's a lot of play on words and so on in Urdu, which I can't reproduce in English, but yes, this kind of madness that overtakes her. Yeah, then this poetry also, we are nowadays in the 20th century, all of this poetry basically disappeared. I had to go into libraries and copy out from manuscripts by hand in pencil, and it was very difficult to get hold of this poetry. It's not available in print. It's some of it has now come back into print, but it was not when I was writing about it. So the interesting thing about this is that if you have heard ghazals, which you must have heard in Hindi movies and elsewhere, the ghazals we are used to 20th century onwards are the very sad ones. They are all about separation and longing and all of this. Now, the interesting thing I found was that, of course, that's not what all ghazals were. There were plenty of ghazals about having fun, about shopping, about going out, about going for picnics, about happy love affairs. And this is an example where this play on the word, my hands and devoted. Now, they are not sexually explicit, but it's very clear. My hands devoted themselves to you last night. I felt so devoted to my hands all night. Yeah. Here's an example of a manuscript which was almost lost by this poet who wrote this poem. This poet's manuscript was almost lost, and there were 2 or 3 poems available by him. And it's a big, fat, beautiful manuscript which was found by chance, almost gone. And then the person who discovered it sent me the scan of it, and that's how I was able to write about it. This is an example of one of the poets. He's known as a major Urdu poet, but this poetry of his had disappeared. He's my favorite poet out of this group. So to go back and just to give you an example of also writing about not just women, but also men. So here, which was writing about love between men was very conventional at the time. About love between women is the unusual thing at this time. So this poet, Insha, wrote this poem about 2 men, just to give you an example. It's very playful. So when he starts off saying, your cheek is made for kisses, why shouldn't I ask for kisses? It could be anyone, it's I and you. You don't know if it is a man or a woman or whatever. But it becomes clear when he says, Jaan nikle hai o miyan de dal, aaj wada natal boseka. So when he uses the word miya, which means Mr. or Sir, it's playful, but it becomes clear that it's a man talking to a man. Yeah. And this poetry about love between women became so popular at this time, so late 18th to 19th centuries, that there was actually a word for poetry about what we would now call lesbian love. That's not the word then. So the word they use many words, and one of the words they used was chapti. Chapti means to stick together, right? And so Chapti Nama is a kind of poem that tells a story about love between women. Yeah, and so I have this is just to give you how the original looks. I have translated into English. Yeah. So to come back to the modern period, to the 20th century, this is the idea of rebirth of 2 things. The fact that spirit has no gender. So I quoted to you that village woman who said the soul has no gender. And the same thing was said to me by a priest who conducted a wedding of 2 women, 2 Tamil women. And he's a Shiva priest in Seattle. He's a computer engineer in the daytime. He just does this priest on work on the side. And I asked him, like, why did you agree to celebrate this marriage? And he said, look, it was the first time I heard of this when they asked me. So I thought about it, and I knew that other priests are going to criticize me. And should I do it or not do it? But then I thought, it's a longer interview, but he said, then I thought, in Hindu texts, marriage is a union of spirits. And second thing, the spirit is not male or female. Atman is not male or female. This is true, I think, in every religion. If you ask that the spirit is not male or female. Gender is only social and a bodily and a present day, a human thing. The spirit is not. If you believe in the spirit is not male or female. So he said, if the 2 spirits want to be united, then why should I? Okay. The same idea, even earlier in 1977. So again, as early as that, when there was no movement, no talk about the subject at all, that's for sure. The first book on the subject, The World of Homosexuals, was written by Shakuntala Devi. She was that famous mathematician, right? And she interviewed the head priest of a very major temple, Vaishnava temple at Sri Rangam, Sri Raghavacharya, and she asked him, there's a long interview again, and he said, look, the reason this could be is you may be attached to someone in one birth, and in the next birth, you will again seek each other. Now, and this attachment doesn't have to be a husband and wife or a love attachment. You could have somebody as who you are very attached to an elephant, or you're very attached to your brother. In the next birth, the gender could change and you could be born differently, but the attachment is what will last. Now, this is an idea that I found fascinating, and I looked back and found it also in ancient texts. This is one of the statements. There are many such statements, but this is from an 11th century Sanskrit text, which says, Vakti Janamantara Pritam manaha snehad karanam, love which arises without any cause, a karanam, that is because of love from a previous birth. Now, this idea is so persistent from about 2000 years ago till the present day. Many priests have given this answer, and many ordinary people have given this answer for why there's this, if a love is so much socially disapproved between two people, any two people, and there are lots of stories in about males and females also in this same text. One is a princess, one is what we would now call a Dalit, and they insist upon loving each other. They're ready to face death or anything. Then finally the families say, like, if they are persisting in this, which is so much socially disapproved of, and they are willing to go through all this, it means they are attached from previous birth, and then we can't do anything about it, right? So if you suppress it, it will burst out in some other form. You can't get rid of it. This understanding of love, I think, is a particularly Indian understanding of love. It also goes, I think, beyond Hindus. The idea, because I found in Muslim poets' writings the same idea of this love persisting across births. I could give you many examples. And I found in this same text stories of two men who are very much attached to each other and who fall in love with each other at first sight. They live together. One of them also gets married to a woman, the other does not. But when one jumps off a cliff, he jumps off a cliff for other reasons. His wife follows him. So we know about Sati. So his wife follows him, but then his male friend also follows him. They all want to be together, and the male friend also jumps off the cliff. So it's again showing this willingness to live and die together, which we see in these young people today who are committing joint suicide. Yeah. So it's who may be man and woman, or who may be two women or two men. In this same story, we also have, I found many words for same-sex relations and same-sex love. I found in Urdu, Swayamvara Sakhi and Swayamvara Sakha. Sakhi or Sakha means friend. Now, the word Sakha is also used in the Hindu wedding ceremony. I don't know if you know, you take 7 vows, and the 7th vow is taken for friendship. You address the spouse as Sakha. So Sakha is not just only a friend. Marriage is also a type of friendship. Yeah. And Swayamvara, as you know, you must have heard, is used for a ceremony in which a woman chooses her own husband. But what is the real meaning of Swayamvara? Vara means choosing. It can mean groom, but it also means choosing. And Swayam, of course, means self. So Swayamvara Sakhi is a woman's self-chosen female friend, and Swayamvara Sakha is a man's self-chosen male friend. This is the words used in the text. So that shows us that these ideas are very old. I should also mention that nowadays, of course, most people haven't read these texts. How many people have read the whole Kama Sutra or the whole Mahabharata or the whole Katha Sarita? Yeah. And most people don't know. A lot of Hindus today would even say, oh, this is wrong, this is against our culture, this is Western, this is against Hinduism. And what I've tried to argue in many books, the first book I wrote on this was co-edited with Salim Kidwai, is called Same-Sex Love in India. And that's where I first started reading these texts. As you know, in Hinduism, there are 4 aims of life, and karma is one of those aims. Karma doesn't mean only sexual desire, it means all desire, but it includes sexual desire. And in the Kama Sutra, which is a Shastra, it's not just a book about sex, it is a Shastra, a Dharma Shastra. Yeah, it's called the Kama Shastra also. So in 4th century, this book describes sex and all desire, including sexual desire, as something that everyone should know about. The author says this book should be part of all men's and all women's education. If you start doing this, because the education he wants is there are 64 types of pleasure-giving arts. Everyone should know this. I think if we start doing this, we'll be spending our whole life on this. How to write poetry, how to paint the body, cosmetics, music, dance, conversation, flower arrangement. All of this is part of pleasure. So you can't have sexual pleasure without all these surrounding pleasures. It is a part of a whole matrix of pleasure. Of course, everyone knows it shows 64 postures of heterosexual intercourse. That's the famous part. But many people don't know that there is a whole chapter on men who desire men. And there's detailed descriptions of how, if you're a man who desires other men, how should you find them? And it says you can become a flower dresser, you can become a masseur, you can give massage, you can become a hairdresser. And this is how you can find out who are the other men who might be interested, right? And it has a detailed description of oral sex between men, which is compared to sucking a mango, and very detailed. So sex is never looked upon as inherently sinful in Hindu understanding before the 19th, 20th century. So it's only after, I would say, around 1857, after British rule proper comes in, that the education system changes, the legal system changes. 1861 is when Section 377 is brought in. And that is when Indians start becoming ashamed of their own literature, both Hindus and Muslims. So all the Urdu literature I told you was basically disappeared, buried and lost. And Hindus also become ashamed of the Kama Sutra. They start translating it without that particular chapter. I don't have time to go into what all is done to the Kama Sutra, but there is this general feeling, there's this general idea that sex, and I've been reading early 20th century writings, not just Gandhi, but practically every major thinker, has a deep suspicion of desire. So in 100 years from 1820, when this poet Insha was writing like this, when he was writing like this, to the 20th century, in 1920, it has become unspeakable. So same-sex love was never unspeakable in Indian literature, but it becomes unspeakable in just 100 years. And that shows you how things can change. And now, of course, it is again speakable. So another 100 years and it changes completely. But I just wanted to show you this beautiful statue. It's a larger than life-size statue of Kamadeva shooting an arrow at two women. And he shoots arrows to make beings fall in love. Somebody I interviewed who performed a wedding, Swami Bodhananda, he said, I asked him, first wedding he had ever performed, this is early, 1993. Now, this is an middle upper class couple. One of them is American. And he said that it was performed in the house with the parents. And he said, look, I said that these two people want to this is the wedding ceremony. And here's the mother of one of them, of Aditya. And they want to get married. So it has to have blessings of God, parents, and elders. So that's why I conducted it. He said many more things as well. He said there's no difference between relationships. In a male-female relationship, you will have problems, you will have ups and downs and all that. Same thing in any relationship. And ultimately, of course, he being a guru thinks that ultimately you have to get over desire. But not everyone has to get over desire right now. You have to go through all the stages to go beyond desire. That's the couple, and this is the American edition of my book on which they are on the cover. And today, this is the couple, not today, but now their children are about 9 years old, with the two children that they had. And now to come back to the question of legal rights, what is the problem? What is the problem? Why now they seem quite happy without any legal rights and they have money and so what is the problem? The problem is this, just to give you one example of not having legal rights and what that means. Now, because the American partner, he can only stay in India for 6 months at a time on a tourist visa. And many of us face this problem. He can only stay in India for 6 months at a time. After 6 months, he has to go out for a few days and come back. He's been doing that for 12. They've been now living here for about 10 years. Yeah, he's been doing that, coming back. But now when the coronavirus occurred, he was out of India at the time visiting his mother and he could not come back. Now, at a certain point, OCIs were allowed to come back. What is OCI? It's an overseas citizen of India. If you are a foreigner married to an Indian, you have an OCI, you will get an OCI immediately, very soon. And then you can stay in India for as long as you want. You have full legal rights. You can't vote, but you can do everything else. You can have a job, you can open a bank account, all of that. And now just imagine if one of a partners dies, the foreign partner is treated as a legal stranger. You have no rights to hospital decisions. You have no rights to funeral decisions. You have no rights over your children if the children are not your biological children. Whereas if it's a man and woman, you have all these rights immediately. If you have an arranged marriage between a man and woman who have seen each other today and got married tomorrow, or seen each other today and got married today, the next day, the foreign partner has all rights. Yeah. But now Michael has been out of the country for over a year and is not allowed, 1.5 years now, and is not allowed back in because tourist visas are not allowed back in. Overseas citizens are allowed in, but tourist visas are not. So that is the importance of rights.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for this detailed description. It's literally an interesting topic to be discussed upon. And now, ma'am, I just have a query regarding your publications, that how your writings, poems were accepted in the society. Like, what was the response of the audience?
Well, the first book that I tried to write on the first book was on British literature, on same-sex love in English literature. So that was published outside. The second book, which was Same-Sex Love in India, we had trouble. It was an edited collection of extracts translated from 15 Indian languages with our introductions. And so it was showing, the purpose was to show that same-sex love has existed in India from over 2000 years. But the publishers in India were very wary about it. Today, the publishers are willing to publish anything, pretty much anything that they see as queer. They're very anxious to do so. But at the time, they were very wary about it. And they said that it could be questioned. So one publisher said, I won't name the publisher, that you are translating in English on one page, on the other page have the original language. Now, 15 languages, how can you do that? The book will become huge. And so we couldn't do that. So it was first published in the US, but then it was published in the US in 2000. And then a couple of years later, it was published in India as well. And there was no negative response from India. In India. And then my other books in 2005, Love's Right, the Samesex Marriage was published both in India and the US. Overall, I would say the books are much more read in India than in the US. They're published in the US and UK, but they are hardly read there because who's interested in this subject on Indians? And not just this subject, but India in general. In the US, most people are not interested. So most of my readership is in India, and therefore I've started publishing basically in India. And no, I haven't. If you go online, I'm sure you'll find some negative responses. But overall, we haven't had any major negative responses so far. That's good. And in fact, we've had a lot of very positive responses where people said that, thanked us for telling them about their own literature and history, which we didn't know about. I didn't know anything about it when I studied entirely at Delhi University. It was never mentioned in the classroom. I didn't know anything about it. I had to start from scratch reading to educate myself, right? So we are presenting it in a condensed form where everybody doesn't have to read the whole Mahabharata, but you can get it. And so most people are happy to know that. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. And the next question that I have for you is that we already talked about how couples of same sex are basically forced to separate by their parents, or they don't have any legal protection. So, ma'am, do you think someday law will be somewhat liberal so that women or men having a same sex relationship can freely choose their partners?
Well, it's already happening. After Section 377, you do have the right, and even before Section 377 was passed, was abolished, I should say, that many couples who managed to go to court, the courts always said they are two adults, they have a right to live as they want. If they want to live together, they can live together. That's their right. They don't have any other rights, but they have right to live together. That was always there. Now, it depends on the family. There are many families who have been sympathetic. I gave you some examples who helped the couple to get married as early as 1987, 1993, 2001. Yeah. But most families, yes, do try to separate them, either by emotional blackmail, by weeping and saying the parents will have a heart attack or whatever, or by actual violence, by locking them up, by taking away their cell phones and so on. And this happens again to both types, to men and women also, not just to same-sex couples. But yes, if marriage became legal, if marriage equality was there, if same-sex marriage was known to be legal, that would, I think, make a huge difference, because then families would also feel that, yes, this is a real institution recognized by society and the law. And so if they do get married, it's not the end of the world, because parents are worried about what will happen to you in old age and this and that, right? So they will feel, yes, this is not just something you're just today, you're with someone tomorrow or something. You want to get married to this person. That's many parents, not all, but many parents may still feel better about it, I think.
Thank you so much, ma'am.